Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar, The Challenge of Creating a Speak-Up Culture in the Workplace. This is part of our Workplace Response to COVID-19 webinar series for Africa, but I would like to make the point that this particular topic is very relevant, very, very important, regardless of COVID-19. If you're engaging with OML Africa for the first time, I just want to briefly tell you who we are and what we do. Occupational Management Limited, in short, OML Africa, is an international core HR management consultancy with offices in Ghana and working in UK and Europe. We work across sectors in Ghana and Africa-wide. We're a team of consultants with over 50 years experience, and we've fused our local and international expertise very well in ensuring that we give the best in HR compliance and good practice with our clients and within organizations that seek our services. Specifically for COVID-19, we have been focusing on workplace response to COVID-19 through our webinar series, our articles, checklists, and guides we've been doing. And the aim of that is to add value, but also to share information with organizations that have found themselves in this situation and are trying to find ways of navigating through. We've also been offering our advisory services, interim support HR services for organizations that don't have an internal HR and actually need support throughout this crisis. We've also been doing a lot of work around business continuity, strategic planning, reviews, looking into recovery with a lot of our clients, and reviewing documents, policies, in light of many companies having to review their terms and conditions and go to their employees or union for variations. So we help them to look at what they can do and what they cannot do. And then, of course, managing dispute. We also offer dispute services, so where relationships are broken down, in giving advisory and support to clients on those issues. So my name is Anita Wiafe-Asinor, and I am the CEO of OML Africa. And in a moment, I will be going over to Penny, who will introduce herself, and then she'll take us straight into the webinar. So I'm very happy to have Penny. Penny and I have been engaging for quite a while now, so it's absolutely amazing that finally we are engaging. Of course, we had hoped that she would come to Ghana, but COVID-19 has not allowed it, but it's fine. We are just happy to have her, and I'm sure in future, definitely we'll be inviting her into Ghana to share more insights. She's an amazing woman. Thank you very much, Penny, for honoring our invitation. So before going over to Penny to take us through the webinar, I wanted to just bring us all onto one page on this topic. When we're talking about creating a speak-up culture, we're not just talking about whistleblowing or people being able to raise grievances or having issues, just the negative. We're also talking about the positive of having a speak-up culture where people can bring their ideas forward, they can bring suggestions, and they can question ideas or suggestions that they know that maybe perhaps it's not the best, and they can do more than just be told. They are part. And the only way that can happen is people feel confident to share the ideas, to speak up. So I have simply put it like this in terms of creating a speak-up culture. I've put where all employees feel welcome and included, free to share their ideas and opinions, raise concerns, grievances, and confident that their ideas are heard and recognized. That is the environment, that is the culture we are talking about, that we want to create in our organization to ensure that we're championing innovation, we're championing employee engagement, we're championing performance, we're championing loyalty and commitment. When employees feel like this, that's the benefit to an organization. So in this session, we are actually going to be focusing on some key areas in this presentation that Penny is going to take us through. We're going to be looking at a speak up culture or a deadly silence. Do people speak up or do they keep quiet? And what is the consequences of this silence? Is it going to be good for your organization or bad for your organization? No mysteries, the diverse drivers that deter employee voice. So we want to look at what are the things that stop them talking? What are the things that affects a speak up culture? Culture differences or common ground and new evidence. So Penny will share with us some evidence and research in these areas in terms of where cultural differences occur when it comes to a speak up culture and where there are common grounds. And then also profound impact, psychological safety at work. What is the impact of having a speak up culture or not? You know, what is the psychological safety at work? What does this mean? Penny will explain all this to us. And then actionable insights for HR standards. So actions for you to walk away to be able to start working on. And we know that this is not an easy topic, and if you have a culture where speak up is not encouraged, we know you have a job ahead of you, but we know the importance and the value this element being part of your culture can do for your organization. So Penny will share some actionable insights for us to take as a basis to start improving what we're already doing, perhaps on speak up culture, or to help us to start taking the steps to encouraging speak up culture within our organization. So without further ado, I am going to pass over to Penny to introduce herself and take us straight into our webinar.
And managing with the brain and mind. I have significant HR experience and today work in various countries in the area of ethics and anti-corruption. And I'm the author of a program run by International Compliance Association on international anti-corruption. But I think the first question I want you to ask yourself is whether this is a topic that should be high on your agenda as a specialist, a professional, or a leader. I love showing this picture because what we do know is that when leaders are deaf to their employee voices, the consequences cannot just be dreadful, the consequences can be deadly. And in the situation we're facing right now with the threat of COVID-19, especially the increased threat of contracting the virus in the workplace, we're in a situation that is very complex, where we need people to be speaking up about risk more than ever before. For the first time, we really understand that when we talk about people being involved in health and safety, the health is a very important part of our efforts. And so it's a good time for us to be talking about a topic, but there's never a bad time to be talking about the topic. What happens if we don't create a speak up culture? Well, as businesses, we make costly mistakes. Often when something goes wrong, you'll be familiar with hearing people saying, oh, well, I could have told you that was going to happen. Well, my response to that is, if you knew it was going to happen, why did you sit back and allow the problem to happen? We lose so many opportunities for innovation as an organization because of the fact that people have thoughts and they can see aspects of a problem that people at the top of the organization can't possibly share unless there is some kind of a dialogue. And so again, we're talking about lost opportunities. Essentially, a speak up culture is essential if we want to have continuous improvement. We do know that the consequence of all of this is the reduced sustainability of the business. And in its worst form, our organizations can have an adverse societal impact through practices and actions that are actually harmful to the society and the communities in which it operates. So true story time, and I know that you will be familiar at least with my first quick case, which relates to Boeing. It's something that's very close to our heart as a continent. We are extremely proud of Ethiopian Airlines, and while we suffer with any loss of life, it was really shocking for all of us when the Ethiopian airline crashed early in 2019. Now, the interesting thing about that crash was that it followed the crash in October 2018 of an Indonesian flight. The consequence was a great deal of death. 346 people died. If it's not the people that you care about, just imagine that Boeing's share price dropped by $13 billion in a single day. Its reputation has been irreparably harmed. Its investment grade has been downgraded. It's really hard for Boeing to sell its planes. They've recently just rebranded the same plane in the hope that it will promote greater confidence now that some of the problems with the plane have been fixed. But what I want to tell you about this story is that people working in Boeing knew that there was a problem with the plane. Many people knew. And it's not only people working in Boeing that knew that there was a problem, it's people who were working in the Federal Aviation Agency in the US, whose job it was to do inspections and assure that the work and the product being created by Boeing met all the right safety standards. And the reason we know this is because in April, after the second crash, the number of new first-time whistleblower reports by experts working within Boeing and by specialist inspectors in the Federal Aviation Agency making hotline calls, giving detailed information about how they knew about the problem in advance was quite astounding. Obviously, we have theories as to the culture in the organization that inhibited the speaking up of both its own people as well as the people who were duty-bound to act in the public's best interest, and that was the Federal Aviation Agency. You may be less familiar with a company called Vale. It's a South American company. It's actually the largest miner of iron ore and nickel in the world. I've taken this from their website. What I loved about their values, and this is still up there, you can go and see it today, is its first value is simply life matters most. The second one, value our people. The fourth one, do what is right. And so it's very interesting to then reflect on what happened in a little town called Brumadinho in Brazil, where Vale was operating and had what we call a tailings dam. This is a dam that is meant for the permanent containment of waste, much of it toxic, that comes from the mining process. Now, this was a massive dam holding trillions of liters of this toxic waste. And here you can see just a snapshot of that waste mud pouring through the town. The sad thing is that the first buildings that it drowned were the company's own canteens where the employees were having lunch. It wasn't just the employees who were lost. It was the small-scale cattle farmers on the adjacent grounds whose land is never going to be able to be used for livestock production anymore. Catastrophic environmental matter. And we still haven't found all the bodies and are unlikely to, but of the bodies found, there are 237. So, what was really sad about this is that reports had been made directly to management and to the ethics hotline by people working at the mine saying that this dam was going to fail. Interestingly, they used an independent quality assurance inspectorate out of Germany, a private company, and those inspectors came and declared the structure to be completely safe. When the dam collapsed, again, it was a historic single-day decline for Vale on the Brazilian stock market of $19 billion in a single day. Interestingly, the leaders of Vale that were involved, as well as 2 of the German inspectors, have been arrested. So here we have 2 instances, one where people knew and didn't speak up in the case of Boeing, and the other, a situation where people did speak up and they weren't listened to. We don't want our organizations to suffer anything like this kind of fate. We don't want a single infection that's avoidable from COVID-19. We certainly want to collectively achieve organizational excellence and sustainability. And for that reason, my focus today is going to be on helping you understand why this is something that we have to manage consciously. Often leaders say to me, well, my office door is open and people must just say what they believe. What is wrong with them? Well, it's not as simple as that. It doesn't happen naturally. And of course, the personality of your employee, information or characteristics of the individual employee will influence their likelihood to speak up. But the context in which they find themselves has a powerful effect. So simply put, the research shows us that some people are prone to speaking up. They're the kind of people we all know that's the first person to put up their hand in class, that in the workplace is happy to say what needs to be said. And of course, there are those of us who are more introverted and who are reluctant to share our thoughts. But what we do know now from data is that people who are very normally outgoing will revert to a more introverted style in a hostile environment where speaking up is discouraged. And that people who find it difficult to find their voice, in fact, blossom and find it much more likely that they will express their views if the environment is appropriate. So of course there are personality differences, but the environment, and obviously that is the leadership context and the values of the organization and the management practices make the difference. One of the things that I'd really like to talk about is what we all know as HR professionals, is that if we want something to happen, we have to make the expectation known and clear. And for some reason, this matter of speaking up when one is aware of information or has insights that the organization really needs to benefit from, it's not an expectation that we generally make explicit. We take it for granted. Often people don't know that they actually have an obligation as an employee to speak up. When I do ethics training with employees at all levels, one of the things that really impacts people is the realization that once they've signed that employment contract, while they might be looking at what the duties are, they might be looking at their pay and their hours of work. What they're not focusing on is that the underlying framework of that contract is a duty of care, a duty to act in the best interests of the employer. And when they understand this, it's quite liberating for people because it gives them permission to speak up when they might have been more fearful. In some countries, we actually have a disciplinary offense, as we do in South Africa, called derivative misconduct. And again, I find people respond very positively and with great interest to the idea that they can be guilty of misconduct in the workplace simply by virtue of the fact that they knew something harmful was happening, being done by someone else, perpetrated by someone else, and took no action to bring it to the attention of the employer. There's also a shortage of opportunities. There's not a lot of time for talking, for small talk in the context of the employee supervisor or employee manager relationship. So it's not often that, unless there's a structured continuous improvement process in place, for example, that a manager creates an open, comfortable space that allows the silence, that allows the sense of leisure in which people will tentatively start to raise their concerns. People also don't have skills. This is something we need to teach people. And it's not just the question of the employees needing to be taught to speak up in a constructive way. It's so important that we teach leaders to listen up. And we know that from the story of our two cases at the beginning. The most important concept that I think intuitively we all respond to is that people need to experience a sense of psychological safety in the workplace. And when this is absent, people are not going to put their necks out, to stick their necks out, to stand up and risk negative consequences. Now, what are these negative consequences? They're not always the extreme consequence of being drummed out of the organization or learning or facing disciplinary action. These are the adverse consequences of being humiliated, of being treated with disrespect, of being isolated, of not being given interesting assignments, of being denied the opportunity of overtime. Mostly, what we want in the workplace is a psychologically safe environment in which people can think clearly and be in their right minds. And what that requires is that part of our brain that is constantly seeking threat and monitoring for risk to the individual doesn't have to be on high alert. Unfortunately, it has to be on high alert when we work in an environment where there is indignity, where people are treated with disrespect. And one of the things that really undoes us is an absence of fairness. I always used to think that this was an obsession or a preoccupation that we have in Africa because of past unfairness. Obviously, in my country, South Africa, that would be the case, but there are many instances throughout Africa where our past and the way past leaders have treated people from our countries has meant that there has been systemic unfairness and a lack of dignity and respect. But interestingly, what I'm seeing is that this issue of fairness is actually a broad requirement of people the world over. Nothing derails us as much as feeling unfairly treated. And as social beings, we are taught that community is important, especially for those of us who grow up in countries where there has been high levels of unemployment, where there is a strong dependence on the community. We are programmed to fear social isolation. Interestingly, one of the profs from Harvard Business School published this book in late 2018 called The Fearless Organization. It's a lovely concept, having a fearless organization. And what she found is that innovation was greatest in parts of a company where the supervisor, what she calls the local leader, creates a psychologically safe environment. Her case study was actually done on Google. And I tend to groan when I look at some of these case studies and books based on companies, tech companies, for example, offering benefits and environments that the average business in our continent will never be able to offer. It feels remote. But what was so interesting about this study is that they had identical teams in so many parts of the world. And what she could do was to measure the extent to which innovation was happening in the team through the extent to which people were contributing willingly and actively to decision making, and to link that to the state of psychological safety created by the supervisor. So the important thing here to remember is that your CEO or managing director can say whatever they like about creating an open door policy and that people are free to speak up. What we know in truth is that it's your immediate superior that has an enormous power over your quality of life in the workplace. Simply a raised eyebrow from a supervisor can stop a person in their tracks when they want to raise an opinion that may be contrary to that supervisor. I've given you a great reading list at the end, and I'm hoping that you will find some of the short articles that I'm recommending, as well as this book, to be something that you'll find useful. Right, so I'm going to give you this whole slide, and I want you to please don't look at the slide. Just listen to me while I explain what I'm going to show you, because it is so difficult for all of us to be watching and listening at the same time. So I should have a blank slide here, and the slide should say, are there huge differences across cultures when it comes to the issue of speaking up? Well, what I want to do is to share with you what I think is one of the most exciting and most important studies done by a team of social anthropologists. Now, what on earth has social anthropology got to do with a speak-up culture? But I've gone through the data in depth. I've summarized it for you here. And the first thing that I need to tell you is that while we might say it was the job of the parents or the caregiver to teach good morals to the child, and that once a person arrives in the workplace, they must come with those good morals. If they don't, there's not much we can do about it. These are unhelpful beliefs. There are many reasons. We don't all have ideal family environments. We don't all have ideal parental role models. But one of the things that we're now starting to discover is what we call moral principles that we have socialized into us as children are not necessarily truly moral principles that help guide us in the complex workplace that we face. Basically, these principles are principles to help us get along in society, to fit in, for our group to flourish and for our community to flourish. What's most exciting about this study is that it actually shows that there are extremely useful principles that are socialized into cultures, and they studied over 60 societies using 600 sources, and were able to find in 99.9% of cultures a common set of messages given to young people. So if you look here on your slide, the list here starts with help your family and help your group. This makes sense of what we're being brought up with are messages to promote the survival of our group. It's a fundamental principle. Let's look at the workplace. Someone giving testimony in South Africa the other day about corruption in procurement of PPE related to COVID-19 said when she managed the tender, she got a message to say, the minister wants his people to get this tender. The minister wants his people. And in all of us, there's an ingrained belief that our first priority is what I call our kin and kind. This is true of all of us. This isn't a race thing. in our workplace in South Africa, there's so many complexes to do with race and gender. But at the same time, you know, we do have different tribes. And one of the big issues that we deal with in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, is the antipathy of the isiZulu-speaking people towards isiXhosa-speaking people, and the complex situations that creates, and these influences and differences and in-group, out-group, clan issues can affect all of our organizations. Right, returning favors. If I ever have a chance to chat to you about issues such as fraud and procurement, gifts and hospitality policies, we'll come back to this issue that we're so prone and taught that if someone does us a favor, we need to do a favor back. And this is obviously very difficult and problematic when it comes to the workplace. And we're trying to get away with favoritism in procurement, for example. But most importantly, we are taught to defer to superiors. This is an overwhelming, strong message that we get, that our parents, our elders are right, and it is disrespectful for us to challenge them. Now, let's think about this. We learn very early on as children that telling our parents or caregivers what they want to hear gets us in their good books. We arrive in the workplace and this is just re-emphasized in such a profound way, because what does the first thing we learn? Well, that refusing to obey an instruction is a surefire way to lose your job. Insubordination is a dismissible offense. And so we have reinforced the concept of deference to superiors. There are gender issues here that create an even greater complication. But what I'm showing you here is that the people who are coming to work in our organizations come with supposedly moral principles that are in actual fact not helpful to their ethical performance, to their speaking up as an active contributor in the workplace. And so we have to make a conscious effort to create a new set of principles and explain how important these are. And I'm just giving you a focus here on the kind of behaviors that you will see that make up these categories. Loyalty to kin and kind is so important. Protecting your own from harm. Now, this obviously gets in the way of speaking up. What if what we really need is for someone to report somebody for not observing COVID-19 social distancing practices? And that person we classify as part of our in-group. It's going to get in the way of us doing the right thing. And then just looking at the whole concept of deferring to superiors, these are the behaviors that we see that go with that value: deference, respect, obedience, loyalty, submission, humility. Understand how very hard it is for people to speak up in the workplace. I've given you the reference for this paper because I think it's so important. As students of human resources, lifelong students, I mean, practitioners who are in a lifelong process of learning, and especially for those of you in compliance who may not have benefited from the behavioral psychology input that human resources people enjoy in their studies, I'd really encourage you to understand and follow what popularly available insights on the concept of cognitive biases and fallacies that impact our decision making. What I'm going to do now is reinforce from a completely different perspective the concept of deference and of maintaining a silence rather than speaking up. So basically, a cognitive bias is a mental shortcut. It's a great skill that we have as humans that help us make quick decisions throughout the day. And if we couldn't take shortcut decisions, life would be quite overwhelming. Unfortunately, this great skill we have can work against us because the biases are often informed by certain beliefs, one of which is the conformity bias. We are taught not to stand out, to fit in. Don't be the tall poppy that will be cut down. This whole emphasis on fitting in with the group makes us instinctively choose the option of conformity. Now, I know it's not true of all people. I do have some clients, especially in higher education, where people are actually pride themselves in being nonconformists. But in the main, in the workplace context, we are certainly seeing people who are biased towards conforming, biased towards being obedient. The other thing we know is that people will generally not take action if they feel that other people are aware of the problem. Why should you? The more people know about the problem, the less responsibility we feel as individuals. And then, of course, for all of us, we really want tomorrow to be predictable, to be much like today. And so as individuals, we'll even deter our colleagues from speaking up because we fear the change that could come from raising difficult issues in the workplace. In some organizations, lying has become the norm. Now, you might say, well, that's not true in my organization, but let me ask you this. When a client phones the dispatch and says, I've been waiting for my new fridge for 3 days and the delivery hasn't come, and the supervisor says to the dispatch clerk, tell the woman her fridge is on the road, and the dispatch clerk knows quite well that the fridge has yet to be loaded onto a truck. What is happening? In countless ways, every day the company becomes a factory in which we learn to lie. As professionals, accountants learn to write various notes for budget performance that are going to be palatable to the board as opposed to raise questions. We then even have organizations that actually lie in their advertising to the public. They claim to have quality standards or to follow socially acceptable practices that they don't follow. Interestingly, one of the sports apparel companies is being charged criminally in France for misrepresentation in advertising, for saying that there was no child labor in their supply chain when there was, because they said this was deceptive marketing. So what happens when the company deceives the public? Maybe your company deceives your revenue service by understating its profits. The answer comes in this great short article I'd love you to read, called When Lying Becomes the Norm at a Company. And this author, Ron Carucci, said this simple but profound thing. When employees perceive duplicity between their organization's stated identity and actions, they eventually follow suit. As I often say, you know, it's ridiculous for a supervisor to ask you to lie for them and then be surprised when their staff lie to them. One of the next problems that I want to bring to your attention is that in many organizations, there are bad things and wrong things that happen, or problems that persist in production that everybody knows about, what we call open secrets. And now what we know is that the more something is an open secret, the less likely someone is ever going to report it. I worked recently with a shipping company where what was apparent at all departments and levels I went to was the unauthorized use of the company vehicles for private errands. And when I fed this back to the CEO, he was completely horrified. And his executive was sitting there saying, but of course, everybody knows that the company vehicles are used for private errands, even though the rule says not. Everybody knew it, except the CEO. So I think we need to be aware that if something is known to others, people are less likely to speak up. And this can become incredibly embarrassing when revealed in the media, because people will say, what is it about that organization that the people knew that this was happening and they did nothing about it? Right, what do we need to do? Of course, we've got to work on creating this climate of psychological safety. It's an important feature of all the leadership training in your organization. But very practically, when I work with managers and supervisors, I talk about this absolute importance of the demeanor and approach they take when an employee raises issues with them. It's so important that supervisors and managers learn that they cannot just have a natural response in that moment, which could be explosive. It could be to demonstrate shock and horror. It could be to put their head on the table. It could be to throw their hands up and say, oh, now we're all in a lot of trouble. What we need is for the employee raising the issue to experience a real calm and a sense of confidence that the supervisor that they're reporting to can hold the information that is being presented to them, can calmly reflect on it, and proceed forward in a responsible fashion. So a solution-oriented problem-solving approach is what's needed in that moment. And what I realize is that so many managers discourage people from speaking up, because the minute that they they experience quite an emotional and often irrational response, and nobody wants to make their boss emotional in a bad way. So we also need to attach social proof to the value of speaking up. People who contribute ideas for improvement, who identify potential problems, are people who need to be acknowledged. And the one thing that I'd really like to say in this regard is something that Anita and I spoke to before we came online, is that I always say that big talk comes from small talk. We don't have time as managers for small talk with our staff. But if your staff are not comfortable having small discussions about little things with you, you simply cannot expect that they are now going to be totally happy discussing big issues, which might be really important and quite urgent for you to know about. That might be issues with reputational implications that can actually discredit the entire organization and compromise its sustainability. We've mentioned we need to make it an expectation that people speak up, and to create this listen up culture. We need our supervisors and managers to have training on listening up. One of the things that's quite important, as an aside, is that there should be an escalation policy. Every single supervisor should know that it's not okay to sit on information that's brought to them, and to know who it is that they're supposed to escalate it to. If everyone has an escalation policy from the bottom to the top of the organization, we can hold supervisors and managers accountable for actually ensuring that issues are addressed. And then, most important, we need to be focusing on the concept of courage in the workplace. And I'm going to come back now to my study of those 7 behaviors, many of which work against speaking up in the workplace. And what I want to do is to suggest that we maximize what we all have, and that is that being brave is good, and that we should speak up on behalf of others. We really need to be promoting the concept of social courage, of pro-social behavior. And what we're starting to see now is that, let's say we have sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation in the workplace, or we see people in trouble. We're encouraging their colleagues to speak up if they themselves cannot find their own voice. And the interesting thing is that when we encourage courage, people respond very well to the challenge, and we want people to feel good about themselves. Right. When we want people to spill the beans about stuff that's very tricky, it's important that we implement best practices with regard to protection of whistleblowing in the workplace. And essentially, in summary, and as many of you know, this means that we need to try and ensure that there's no occupational impairment. People talk about retaliation. I've mentioned fear of retaliation, just the supervisor raising an eyebrow as being enough to stop people in their tracks. But it's certainly very important that there is no unknown to us retaliation that is delivered by the supervisor or the local leader that is precipitated by the person speaking up. And I think that ensuring that feedback is given is very important. In South Africa, our Protected Disclosures Act was updated in 2017 to put in actual timeframes for giving feedback, which was quite useful. And for those of you who are interested in the idea of occupational impairment, I've found that the EU Whistleblowing Directive is very interesting. It contains examples of retaliation that we don't have in our law here. For example, it forbids retaliation by delivering occupational impairment to the friends or family members of the person who blew the whistle. Now that makes a lot of sense to me. I think ensuring confidentiality is extremely essential because of people's unwillingness to be branded as a snitch. And it is important that people have multiple channels for speaking up. They need to know, of course, that if they need to understand their payslip, they must go to payroll, not phone a hotline. But if they think that their supervisor is cheating them out of overtime, then maybe they can phone the hotline. We need to help people understand that there are multiple channels. I talk about giving people the opportunity to have their say, their way. If a person is only going to speak to you via an anonymous hotline, well, that's the only way they're going to speak to you. And if you're going to have that hotline, it's really important that it is genuinely independent. Very difficult to run an effective hotline that is trusted inside. And when I talk about independent, I'm actually not talking about just third party. I'm ideally talking about a specialist service provider that is not an audit company, because of the fact that there will be such additional confusion and suspicion potentially when it comes to the audit brand being associated with your hotline. And of course, you need an integrated incident management system. You need a system that allows intake of reports from all different sources, direct and otherwise. And if you don't give people a clear path to disclosing problems in the company, what do people do? As this author says, they've got the choice between going public or just ignoring the issue. And when people have to ignore an issue, they have to stop caring. And it's in this way that I want you to know that when we create a speak up culture, we're not only ensuring we have a more ethical environment, we're ensuring that we achieve that employee engagement level that we are all looking for. And when people have to stop caring because of disillusionment, because of being ignored, we cannot be surprised if they in time stop acting in our best interests. Your board might say to you, well, we want people to speak up, they have to be rewarded. We often find this with finance professionals who say it's a cost-benefit equation. People will speak up if you pay them the money. No, 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 it's wrong. You absolutely cannot offer financial reward for speaking up in the company, because what you're trying to do is to get people to fill what is essentially an obligation that they have to you in the first place. One of the studies that's very important has found that where financial rewards are offered, it actually interferes with people's sense of moral obligation. It brands people who do speak up as paid informants. In South Africa, we call them mpimpi, so it's a derogatory term. We want people to talk up because they care about the business. And in actual fact, in one study, they found that people actually delayed reporting to allow a problem to get bigger and bigger because the extent of the reward was a proportion of the extent of the loss that they were now revealing to the company. We've got to deepen our understanding of promoting social courage and pro-social behavior. We can have a webinar on promoting social behavior, pro-social behavior, and it needs to be a priority in your organization development and leadership initiatives. In summary, what I want to say to you is that people are not all good or bad. At any one point in the workplace, they might be closer to their best self or closer to their worst self. The good news is that while people are susceptible to being their worst self, they are also suggestible to being their best self. And that is our role. It's our responsibility is to do everything we can to encourage people to be their best selves in the interests of them as workers, in the interests of their career, in the interests of their colleagues, of their families, and of our communities. And what I want to do is to talk to you about the fact that whatever you do as an ethics, compliance, and human resources practitioner, especially during this time of COVID-19, is to be using the lighthouse as a metaphor for all your communication. Let's think about what a lighthouse does. It shines regularly. It shines into the darkness. It reaches way beyond its location. It guides people to safe harbor. And that is what our role is. Through your communication, use the lighthouse as your principle, and you will see that promoting a speak-up culture is not a once-off initiative, it's a campaign. When you get the presentation, you'll see some information about how to connect with me. And if I'm not already connected with you on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's so wonderful to be part of this very generous human resources, ethics and compliance community. And I'm just showing you here the great references that I'm giving you and hoping that this will be helpful for the person who wanted the name of the book. And Anita, I'm going to end on that note and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Penny. Thank you so much. That was more than insightful. Just to tell everyone that we will share all the references following the webinar, as well as the webinar itself. That was very insightful. I think my notes, I stopped at some point. It's very, very deep. This issue is very, very deep, and from just the way you've walked us through, it's highlighted just how important it is for us to take this as a very serious topic to work on. Because if you look at the impact, just from the examples you gave us from Boeing and Valley, it's quite shocking. On that note, we've opened up for Q&A. So if you have any questions for Penny, please, you can type it in the Q&A and I will read them out for her to respond to those questions. I have a first one here. Okay, I was asking for the recording. Whilst everyone is getting ready to type their questions, I had noted a few things, Penny, that I wanted to bring up for us to discuss. I wanted to say that from the key things that I picked up from the points that you were making in terms of what will be stopping people from speaking up, tended to be around, for example, from the perspective of the organization and its leadership or its stakeholders, who is coming very much from loss of profits, loss, what is a driver. And then from the employee's perspective, it's perhaps loss of their job, their income, or not fitting in, the consequences of retaliation, and so on. So you have different perspectives operating here. And my point is, if we take our side of the world, where jobs, like you mentioned, opportunities are limited, and people have to hold on to the opportunities they have, and they are working in organizations where, yes, definitely they're going to be seeing things and know that actually I should speak up. But then they think about the consequences of speaking up, and they don't. And these cultures have been created, they've been engraved. I wanted to ask, how do you begin to change this culture, to begin to influence, to bring the importance, the values of a speak up culture, of us doing the right thing, even where we stand to lose as an organization? How do you turn a culture that's engraved into not speaking up, engraved into, like you said, open secret? I'm just sitting here just thinking, there may be people listening and thinking, in my organization, there are open secrets. People know, but nobody's speaking up, and they are just thinking, where do I even begin to try to influence this culture?
I think that's such a key issue. Certainly, we're in a situation living in countries with high levels of unemployment, where people do not have the freedom to exit an organization. They have an obligation, perhaps to 10 or 15 family members who are dependent on them for their basic needs. And this is an important issue to understand for engagement in the workplace on every level. Essentially, when we're faced with a toxic work environment, for example, one that is psychologically unsafe, our options in any threatening situation are, as you know, fight or flight. Fight is not an option for an employee. We can't afford to go up against our bosses and be that outspoken, difficult person who's branded as a troublemaker. That's what we fear, because that can lead to us losing our job. And then, of course, we don't have other jobs to walk out to. So what happens is that we freeze. And when people freeze, that is a state of disengagement. In the ethics training that I do, and this, even with farm workers at entry-level jobs in the organization, just spending time creating a link in people's minds, facilitating the linking between the success of the organization and their personal success and the success of the community, is a link that helps to make people feel more, can we call it, connected to the organization as the group or the kind. So we have to shift people's views of the group that they're loyal to as being their colleagues, people at their level, people in their job category, and people of their clan, to seeing that they are an important part of the group, that the future of the organization is also their future. I work with people in South Africa who've worked in companies where they were so proud to work for the company. They might have been a first person to actually work as a young graduate in the family. They love going home to their parents in a rural area, going in a nice car, taking gifts for granny, and proudly talking about their employment. And then when that company got into terrible disrepute due to state capture related corruption, the terrible embarrassment and humiliation, and a lot of people here suffering from that suspicion that hangs over you just by association. So we spend a lot of time talking about these things and people emotionally connecting with how unfair it is that their career, their reputation, their livelihood, and their ability to fend for their families can actually be compromised by other people's wrong actions. And so that's been a very interesting lever. But generally, creating a sense of belonging and creating the organization as the group to which you have a sense of belonging is really going to help us. It's just one of the answers to a complex organization development challenge that you threw out there, Anita.
Right. And I just wonder whether you can share with us, you know, because you do a lot of these trainings and you work with organization on a lot of these issues. What has worked? You know, let's say where there a culture where we're trying to change a culture, or where this speaking up has become a principle that they want to champion. You know, what strategies in terms of after the training, what strategies help to transfer it into practice in the workplace for it to actually start working and becoming part of the way we work and what we believe in our principles and our values. Like, you know, I'm just trying to look at the transfer, because many a times you do campaigns, sensitization, you highlight the importance, the benefits, people engage, they see it, but then transferring it into practice and maintain becomes the problem. So what strategies has worked to actually make that impact, to move away from you know, our open secrets, our not speaking up, into a speaking up culture? What strategies?
Well, the first thing is that we need to keep it top of mind on an ongoing basis. So in our employee communications, it's not a once-off issue. We need to be communicating those messages in various different ways. And this is true for all of our ethics programs, not just with regard to the speak up culture. The skills, I think, really need to be attended to for the supervisors, managers, as well as for the staff. And the skill is around participating in courageous conversations. And conversations are really the key. We can make such a difference within a small team where one manager starts to handle one-on-one meetings with the staff slightly differently, possibly allowing 5 or 10 minutes at the end to kind of sit back and ask questions such as, have you confronted any big dilemmas this last week? What are the kind of issues that are frustrating? Where do you experience bottlenecks in cooperation? Actually asking direct questions in the guise often of being caring and interesting, but especially along the lines of being interested in continuous improvement and being interested in what as a supervisor I can be doing to help you achieve your job expectations better. And it's simply through these conversations we can bring about change in a single department. And I talk about these as islands of integrity. In the ideal situation, this is something that starts at the top and cascades down through the organization. But essentially, what we're left with in most instances is working where we can as HR practitioners and ethics practitioners to work with people who are motivated and interested, especially the leaders, and to support them. And as we create more of these islands of integrity, what we find that as the tide turns, together, those islands of integrity constitute a really strong mainland of a new culture.
Fantastic. We've got 3 very good questions here, actually. I'm going to read out. The first one says that we know that one of the key challenges of speak up in the workplace is the fear of retaliation. What are key steps and bold steps to build a retaliation-free organization where people can be suggestible?
This might sound obvious, but I know very few companies who have done that. And that is that you need an anti-retaliation clause or set of clauses in your ethics policy. So it has to be an offense for a supervisor to deliver any occupational detriment or to threaten it. Okay. People can often say, but I've done absolutely nothing to compromise the employee, but it's the threat of it. We actually have to make it an explicit act of misconduct on the part of the supervisor. So I think that that's a very important thing. We're missing a trick in not just setting out our requirements in these regards to managers and supervisors at all levels. We need to promote employee awareness and manager awareness of different types of retaliation. It's one of the reasons why those of us who have intranets and we can run short videos that everybody sees, find it very useful to communicate on a subject. For example, offer a short video on understanding different types of retaliation, even if it takes 7 minutes. When people know that that is being publicly available to everyone in the company to watch, it really has a very empowering effect. So, yeah, retaliation is a big subject on its own, and I've just thrown out a couple of examples. Thank you.
It is. The next question is that, is there any correlation between actively disengaged team members and unethical behaviors?
Completely. I think there's a very strong correlation. What we need to understand is that when people disengage, they're disengaging their hearts and minds. And that means their care for the organization's best interests go with that disengagement. Often people who are disengaged, rightly or wrongly, not always the organization's fault, are people who feel aggrieved, they feel hard done by, and they're much more likely to engage in what we call motivated reasoning or justifying. They're people who want to balance the books, as it were. I didn't get the promotion that I feel I deserved, and so I feel quite entitled to be taking stationery from the office in January to cover my children's school books. That would be a minor example. So disengagement is a terrible risk to ethical conduct. And the wonderful thing is a secret. I often talk on something called the leadership of ethics, and then I talk the neuroscience of leadership and the neuroscience of ethics. And it's the same presentation, I just put a different front cover, because the very things that help to create an engaged work environment are the same managerial behaviors that create an ethical work environment. So you get two for the price of one. They are paired at the totes, to use racing terminology. And so your the participant is exactly right to say, is there a correlation? Absolutely, it's without doubt. People who've stopped caring are more likely to cause harm.
Right. So actually, disengagement, as we know, when we are looking at employee engagement, is we highlight on that, is a very big problem that should not be ignored. The consequences.
Major.
Yeah. The other question is, who owns the speak up culture in an organization? Is it leadership?
Wow.
Is it a collaborative ownership? Who owns it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I know that the textbook answer is that the leadership are responsible. I think that the people who have to take professional lead to see it as part of their professional obligation are the people that I call the guardians and the gatekeepers in the organization. right? The guardians and gatekeepers will be people working in finance, governance, risk, ethics, information technology, human resources. In fact, the most fabulous work that I do is to work with groups of these people to get them together. And often you find that while they might sit together in meetings with executive leadership, they seldom sit down as the guardian professions and strategic support staff in the company and piece together their shards of insights. And together they get a whole picture. So my mission is to encourage people across those guardian and gatekeeper roles within the organization to be working collaboratively on the issue of promoting a speak-up culture.
Mm. Another question is that when it comes to creating speak-up culture, how best can organizations navigate the cultural diversity and its associated sensitivity?
Sure. Very good question. So what I would say is this. That study that I introduced to you by Oliver Scott Curry and his colleagues identified values that are common to all of us, or beliefs that are common to all of us. We've got to get this right. Focusing on what is common to all of us. All of us are people that share a brain that operates in a particular way. So we need brain-friendly communication, we need brain-friendly supervision, and that will be helpful for absolutely everybody. We need to be building on messages that are common to all people, and we need to be counteracting these socialized beliefs that we all have. So what I'd say is this: we're overplaying the differences between people. What I would do is to say that in your communication campaign, we have to be very sensitive to local differences. Just words that we use that might be offensive to one group might be impactful for another group. And so when I work with people working in multiple different locations around the world, I say, focus first, do a damn good job of communicating and promoting a speak-up culture based on what we know is true of all of us. We all have cognitive biases. We all have these beliefs that we have to behave in a particular way. So I'd say relax about the diversity. Let's start focusing on tailoring your messages to diverse audiences once you're doing a really good job of talking to what is common to all of us as human beings.
Yes, absolutely. The other questions is that how do you know if you're being victimized or that retaliation is coming because of you speaking up? Like what perhaps is what would be the signs or actions, or because sometimes it's not obvious.
True.
It's difficult even when you feel that you're being victimized or there's a retaliation to prove. It's like what we say, institutional racism, and
exactly.
What does that mean? So how would you know if you're being
it's
victimized?
quite interesting because, when I was appointed human resources executive, it was in the 1990s, and I was the first woman appointed to the executive team. And they actually had a meeting to discuss whether I'd be allowed to attend the meetings or whether they'd continue to have male-only meetings and just give me the minutes afterwards. And that's going back a while in terms of attitudes to women in the workplace. And obviously, we've still got a great deal of work to do with regard to prejudice on all fronts. But my feeling is this. If you're a professional, and most of you here taking part are people in one or other of the internal strategic support professions, you've got a duty to speak up, and my attitude was simply not to second guess myself and not to spend time trying to analyze whether I was being sidelined because I was an outspoken person or because I was a woman. I think that we have to be driven by our values. And if the organization is unable to accommodate a professional person being true to their values in a respectful way, in an appropriate way, then ideally that organization should not be having the benefit of your services. So if you're not feeling it overtly, I'd say proceed with confidence. Your first obligation is to your profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also worth talking to a person to say, I was so glad to have the opportunity of sharing my thoughts on that subject or sharing my insights. I must be honest that I did so with a little bit of trepidation. And since then, I've been wondering whether it's still okay with you and me. I really didn't want to offend you. And when we do practical kind of skills training, we talk to people about bearing in mind that that manager that they're talking to similarly has a brain that makes them feel threatened and defensive, and that we need to take that into consideration and maturely raising issues.
Yeah. Now I have.
You're running.
Yes, we'll take these last 3 questions, and then I think we'll have to stop, ladies and gentlemen. I have 2 very specific questions that are more organizational led. The first one says, how do you handle a situation where top leaders have favorites and accept gossip from such favorites against other employees who show a kind of divide and rule? So.
Big question, no silver bullet. If there was an easy solution, you would have found it already. I've been there. It is very frustrating. It creates for suspicion. It's not fair. It's that issue. Favoritism is, anathema to fairness. And fairness is very profoundly important in the context of social justice. So one of the things in my ethics training, when we talk about what are the behaviors that we see in the workplace that don't match our definition of ethical conduct, favoritism by supervisors and leaders is probably the most common issue to come up. And again, what I can say is that we've got to be communicating more clearly with all managers about the importance of not practicing favoritism. And we need to have someone in the organization who is bold enough and who has credibility, possibly the chief HR officer or a governance head, to go and sit down with that CEO and say, there is a perception that you listen to this person more than others, and they may be using that ear of yours in a way that is preventing you from having the full picture, and we know that you would really want the full picture. So yeah, bravery in the face of speaking up to the CEO is very difficult, but for those of you who are leading in these kind of positions and professions within an organization, it is your obligation.
Yeah. There's 2 questions here which I think are similar in some ways. The first one is, what can HR do with an open secret that has been brought to the attention of the leadership and there is no action? And then the other question is, how do you make leaders appreciate that when a staff speaks up about their unethical behavior, it is because they care about the organization and not because they don't like them?
Yes, absolutely. Isn't this so ironic? Of course, we do have people who are endlessly stating the problem but not coming up with any solutions. They're disruptive, they're anti-authoritarian, and unfortunately, everyone gets tarred with the same brush. But yes, we are the ones, those of us listening here today, because it's our job and we care about it, that need to be communicating that speaking up is a sign of engagement. A big study done recently on percentage of hotline reports in relation to performance of companies in the US, found that low numbers of reports or few numbers were correlated with lower performance by the companies. And one of the things that became very clear is that if you have a very low number of reports to the hotline, generally it's an indication of a disengaged and uncaring workforce. I can give you that study. It's really worth putting on the boss's desk. I've spoken to the last point that you raised. The first point or the second last question, could you just repeat that, Anita?
The HR one, where the question was, what can you do where there's an open secret?
Open secret.
Yeah.
No one's doing anything about it.
No.
Right. Okay. So I'll just either one has to be like a stuck record, raising the issue and finding new and different ways to raise the issue with the CEO and the leadership. Effectively, we're people who are influencers, and we need to be able to craft a message that convinces as to the problem. Depending on whether what's happening is potentially threatening to the business's profitability, sustainability, and reputation, those of us in senior positions have an obligation to take action. What I've done on a few occasions as an HR leader, when my HR managers have come to me and said, an employee has brought this to me, or we know that this is happening, but I actually can't pick it up because the line manager concerned is going to shut me out of that team and make it impossible for me to continue working with them. I mean, in HR, we've got to keep our relationships, even if they're not very good relationships. We need to be able to influence, and we need the door open. So there have been times, I haven't done it often, when I've said to the HR manager, right, you phone the ethics hotline, you phone, you can even tell the hotline, I am from HR at this company and I'm making this report on behalf of an employee or a group of employees. And then the report comes through anonymously via the hotline, and an increasing number of organizations, due to international anti-corruption compliance legislation, there's an obligation that reports are being attended to, that people are actually being audited as to whether reports are being followed up on. If you have an audit committee chairperson or someone else responsible to governance, you can go and sit with them and strategize how best to do this. That's just me throwing out a few of the suggestions.
Fantastic. The questions that come in, unfortunately, we can't be here for so many hours here. So I'm going to give Penny the last question, and then if I've taken note of the other questions that we've not answered, then I'll give that to her for her to respond to you. I've taken note of the names and everything. All right, so I'm going to ask this last question because I think it's an important question. I think all the questions are very important, but unfortunately we can't answer all of them. But also to say that the references and the resources, we will make those available as well when we send it, and then also we'll make it downloadable off the website as well. All right. So this question, which I think is very important, asks that if the leadership teaches speak up, but are not that committed to the very thing that they are teaching, what will be the strategy to overcome this issue from the perspective of the HR? So we're talking about, we're teaching speak out, but actually we're not committed.
Not practicing it. Yeah. Well, I think there are many things that one can do. The first thing I do is to say, let's start with what is written up as company policy. Not just what words are communicated, but what is in the actual policy. Let's look at updating, revising, refreshing. I do a lot of work on writing ethics policies. including strong speak-up elements. Because once you put that through your executive team and get their approval, and it's really hard for them not to approve it because it's so obviously necessary, you can use that policy for communicating. And essentially these leaders that are not practicing what they preach need push. They need support. Maybe they need coaching. They need the environment to be rewarding them for practicing what they preach. So it's really an upward change management process. And changing upwards is one of the toughest things we do as HR people. And it's one of the most important, because when you are brave and courageous enough as an HR person to be acting as a courageous advisor to the CEO, in the process, what you are doing is contributing to the future success of the business and to the day-to-day quality of life of everybody who works in the business.
Thank you so much, Penny. I have taken a lot from this. My key takeaway from what you said is that we need to create a psychological safety where no blaming is part, where we focus on solution-orientated problem-solving approach. You said that leadership need training on listening up. We should have an escalation policy, and we should be teaching courage, that being brave is good. We should ensure confidentiality, promote awareness to our employees, and most importantly, we should be ethically led. The policies that came out of what you said that I noted down was having whistleblowing policies, ethical policy, and these policies have to have within them how we escalate issues, or even how people can bring their ideas up. And then also I picked up having means of people being able to make suggestions, whether it's through suggestion box, through your intranet platform. That was also very important. Having an ethical hotline that is actually managed externally, not within the company, that encourages confidentiality, that people should feel they can actually speak up. And lastly, our open door policies, having a focus. What does it mean to have an open door policy? But I think the last words from me will be, being brave is good. So these are the key things that I picked from your presentation, which I have felt has been very insightful. And by all the comments in a chat box, people have found it very insightful and very, very good. So we are so grateful, and I'm so glad that you came to talk to us about this topic. And I hope that moving on from here, whether you're the ethical officer, manager, the HR leader, that we would actually pick this topic up. We can see the impact of handling this topic very well. And we hope that you will share with us some of the things that you do moving forward on this issue. We will definitely not stop the conversation here. We will be trying to find different ways of keeping the conversation going on this, because of just how key a topic it is for all organizations. So thank you once again, Penny, so much for your time. We will share the presentation. As I said, we will also share the references and any resources that Penny shares with us. And we hope that you will continue to be following our webinars. We do our best to try and bring you good content, to bring you good experts and good people who want to add value to you and share insights to help your organizations excel. So from me at OML Africa, I want to thank you all for attending. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.